Hi everyone, hope you're all well. So there's a lot going on right now news-wise around the world, and rather than making individual videos of all these subjects, I'm going to kind of amalgamate them into this. So please excuse me for that, and I hope you understand the reason why. I am trying to reduce the overall number of videos I'm making. I'm not going to stop. I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing, but I do want to get a bit more management on the channel. In recent weeks, I've deleted around 100 videos. They were older videos that were barely watched, that were a bit repetitive, that I wasn't too happy about the sound quality. But my channel still has over 3,500 videos, so there's more to do. So that's what I meant by polishing this up a bit. If you do come across an old video that's no longer there, it's unlikely, but if that happens, that's the reason why. I'll be happy to address that if you're wondering why it's deleted, but most of them are still there. So I'm just going to cover these different things kind of on a very base level. I'm not going to go into huge detail, just some basic thoughts. Um, Two countries have seen serious protests in recent weeks, some of them turning violent. That is Sri Lanka and Peru. And there have been violent clashes on the streets of Colombo and Lima. In the case of Peru, at least 9 people have been killed. In the case of Sri Lanka, there's rising fuel costs, and it looks like a pretty tense situation. Apparently, people have tried attacking the homes of government ministers. Um, I haven't looked enough into those two cases to comment in great detail, but um, it just shows that often in different parts of the world, people are very dissatisfied with the way the government's performing, and some countries are harder to govern than others. I think that's true as well. Um, but like I said, I don't know enough about the circumstances of those situations to comment in great detail. But they are situations to watch whether they escalate or not. I hope things do calm down. I hope that the pressure on the public can be eased because that isn't good for anyone. Um, Ukraine, of course, is still a major news story, understandably so. I think Boris Johnson's trip to Kiev was smart. It was brave. I mean, true, Kiev isn't seeing the sort of fighting it was a few weeks ago, but it is still a war zone, and that Johnson's not going to lose any points from that. It was a good move to go and show Zelensky he was there in person rather than just words. It is interesting that Zelensky has singled the UK and Boris Johnson out for praise. I think that there is a sense that Macron's meetings with Putin, whatever the good intentions may be, are misguided. I mean, when World War II broke out, no Western leader wanted to meet with Hitler. Um, and I think this is a very, very critical situation. Is it World War III? Maybe not. Maybe that speculation has decreased a little bit, but it's still, I don't think we can underestimate how dangerous it is, and I don't think anyone should be under the illusion that just because Russia has pulled out from some areas and is now focusing on Donetsk, that the war is over, or that Russia's belligerent behavior has come to an end. Far from it. I think that Putin has been shocked by the level of resilience the Ukrainians have shown. Um, but at what price? I mean, the atrocities are absolutely staggering. Even if you consider the Ukrainian sources may be exaggerated, for example, tens of thousands of people dead in Mariupol, I think it's very likely that thousands of people are dead in Mariupol. It is very clear that Russia is committing atrocities on a massive scale. Um, so, this war is already just over a month old, and it can rightly be called a major, major conflict in terms of the mortality and in terms of the impact it's having. Um, so for Johnson to go there, I think it was a good move to show solidarity with Zelensky. I know the new Austrian chancellor is going to meet Putin. At first, I raised eyebrows at that because I thought, what's that all about? But to be fair to him, he's going to push Putin hard. Also, Johnson isn't the only leader to have visited Zelensky in person. Um, the leaders of Poland, let me get this right, Poland, Estonia, and I believe Slovakia travelled to Kiev a few weeks ago. So Johnson's not the first leader to do it. But I do give him credit for doing so. It was a good gesture. I do still feel though that the way we have handled it as a country, the British people have been very generous. There's very strong feelings among the British public in support of the Ukrainians, and I think the government has been tough in terms of sanctions and so on. I'm embarrassed by the way we've handled the visa situation. You know, putting up red tape to people who are fleeing a war zone is just lamentable. Um, in that sense, I think that's wrong. It's just this computer says no attitude. You know, when people are clearly fleeing a war zone, I think if they have family or contacts in the UK, frankly, there should be a visa waiver and they should be able to come here. I'm not suggesting we let in hundreds of thousands of people. I know you have to have some vetting, especially for young children who may be unaccompanied. There is that. But I think we've only issued 12,000 visas compared to the what is it, 150,000 people that Poland has in, or even more. So it's embarrassing. Even if you consider that those neighbouring countries are naturally going to have a higher influx of people, Britain does stand out in terms of how we have handled the visa situation. I think we're the only European country that have put up visa barriers to Ukrainians. That's a disgrace and it's an embarrassment. And Johnson's government needs to change that. Priti Patel says she's as frustrated as everyone. Well, she's the Home Secretary. She has the power to do something about that. She says it takes time to change. Well, I'm sure those other countries had visa regulations. They somehow managed to um, get rid of those. So no, I'm not happy about the way we've handled that. But I wouldn't disregard what Zelensky's saying. The fact that he is singling Boris Johnson and the UK out for praise is a good thing, and we could be proud of that. Um, yeah. So Ukraine is a big story. There's conflicts going on elsewhere, of course. Northern Nigeria, there's a very bloody bandit conflict going on. That's kind of a colloquial name. Um, it's very violent. I mean, that part of northern Nigeria has always had problems, or at least for a long time, it's had problems with religious violence. And in the last decade, Boko Haram, and now the bandit insurgency. It's it's a very difficult part of the world. And there's conflicts going on elsewhere. It would take too long to go into details about all of them. Um, the war in Tigray is still raging. That's another major conflict. But two big political stories I want to touch on. Um, one is the ousting of Imran Khan in Pakistan. The other is the French presidential race. I'm just going to touch on these in a basic way for time management reasons. Imran Khan, good riddance. I think he was bad news. Now, as a caveat, let me say I think Pakistan is a very, very difficult country to govern. It's a country of over 200 million people. It's a country that has a very strong conservative Islamic base, which poses a lot of issues. It's a country which has regions that are remote and very underdeveloped, in contrast to mega cities like Karachi and Lahore. Um, and it's got a history of political instability. So it's not an easy country to run. And then added to that is problems from environmental issues, flooding, and so on. So I think that, I don't envy the position of being president or prime minister of Pakistan. At different times. Those two also have had different levels of power. Um, in recent years, the prime minister's become more powerful than the president. In the Musharraf years, and in the Zia years, the presidency was more powerful. Imran Khan. So back in 2017, I knew a bit about him. I knew he was a famous cricketer. I knew he dabbled in politics for a while. Um, he came across as intelligent, charismatic. I thought he could have been an interesting leader. Unfortunately, anyone thinking that Pakistan under Imran Khan would have reformed will have been very disappointed over the past 5 years. In the past 5 years, Imran Khan has been a stooge for Islamists. He has done nothing but enable them. And I cannot overlook the time that he, Recep Erdogan of Turkey, and Mahathir Mohamad of Malaysia actually tried demanding that the UN impose blasphemy legislation, um, to make that a universal thing, i.e., members couldn't offend Islam at that sort of level. That was a dangerous move. And the arrogance of Imran Khan to lecture Western countries, particularly France, over supposedly Islamophobia in France, whilst on his record, on his watch, the persecution of minorities has continued, arguably got worse. There's a case of Aja Bibi, the Christian woman who was hounded out of the country, uh, who was spared the death penalty, but whose life was very much in jeopardy. And disgracefully, she couldn't come to the UK because of the Islamic threat in this country. I think she finally went to the Netherlands. But that's far from the only case. There was a case of Mashal Khan, the young student who was savagely beaten to death at Bardan University the year that Khan was elected. That has continued on his watch now. I don't expect any Pakistani president to get hold of the Islamists overnight. I think that's very, very difficult to do. It is a very, very powerful case. I understand that. Um, but the depth to which he has pandered to them is a disgrace. Now, I don't know if this is just him doing it for politically convenient reasons because it gives him a base, or if Khan himself is actually a bit of an Islamist. I don't know what it is. Um, I mean, his own private life isn't exactly, a good pious Muslim. He's been married several times. He had a reputation as a bit of a playboy. He's not exactly a pious Muslim. So, I am tempted to think it's sort of more about realpolitik and just convenience. But that, by definition, is political cowardice. Khan should have forcefully stood up to the Islamists, especially regarding the treatment of minorities. And at the very, very least, if he couldn't do that, at the very least, he has absolutely no right to lecture Western countries on Islamophobia. His government has utterly failed to say or do anything about the way China is treating Uyghurs. In fact, Pakistan's collaborated with China in that regard. That's a disgrace. So much for the Ummah. So I think Imran Khan is a personification of the hypocrisy of Islam's dogma. In other words, we should all stick together with the Ummah. Muslims should watch out for one another. Nah, not when trade is concerned. To hell with the Uyghur Muslims in China. Um, and let's lecture the West about Islamophobia, but do far too little to protect minorities in this country. Sure, when people are lynched there's arrests and there's condemnation from Islamabad, but I don't think they would do anywhere near enough to protect minorities. This is why I find it rather galling to hear about Islamophobia in the West, because there is simply no rational comparison between what it is like for a Muslim in the UK or even France, which is a bit more forceful in secularism than the UK is, but the UK or France or Canada or the United States the life of a Muslim in Western countries is just not comparable to the life of a Christian or an atheist or a Hindu in Pakistan. It just isn't. Um, the depth of persecution is very severe. That's not to say that India is perfect either, but that's for another video. So yeah, I think Imran Khan's been a big disappointment. This guy that's replaced him, Shabazz Sharif, excuse me. I don't know much about him except he comes from a political dynasty, the Sharifs. His older brother, Nawaz, was a three-time prime minister. Too early to say. I don't really know his politics, and it appears he's sort of a caretaker prime minister. Imran Khan's popular, especially among the Pakistani diaspora. So unfortunately, he could return to power. I say unfortunately because I do not think it is good the depth to which he has pandered to Islamists. And I say that knowing that it's not easy for any Pakistani prime minister to stand up to them, but that's leadership. That's what they have to do, because in my opinion, Pakistan has been held back by their dogma. Pakistan is a country that has great potential, but it's been held back by religious fanaticism, um, and Khan has pandered to it. Now, moving on to France. Again, I'm just going to scratch the surface here. As expected, Emmanuel Macron and Marine Le Pen have got through the first stage of the votes. Now, I don't think it's a good choice for the French people. I think Macron even from an outside perspective, he comes across as arrogant. He comes across as a bit elitist. I think there's a real arrogant streak there um, to the French people and on the world stage. Now, Macron's a smart guy. I think he's probably a capable leader, but that arrogance is not an appealing quality. What I mean by that is he sometimes gives this impression that he's sort of like a prince talking down to people, and he sort of has this idea that um, this is how it comes across. I could be wrong, but like he takes his power for granted. Now, the thing in French politics is there's always been this drive in presidential elections to keep the far right out, the Front National. It seems that people are going against that narrative now and thinking, well, we've always done this. Maybe it's time to give Marine Le Pen a chance. Um, I certainly would be uneasy about that. I know there's people in other countries that sort of see her as the shake-up that's needed, much in the way that Trump was. One of my main issues with Marine Le Pen actually is nothing to do with racial issues. I think she probably has worked very hard to detoxify that party's image from the days of her father. I think she's genuinely moderated the party. What I don't trust about Marine Le Pen is she's one of many Western right wingers. Viktor Orban's another example, Trump's another, who have a very questionable record on Putin. Um, Macron, of course, he's been meeting Putin in these summits. I don't know whether that's extreme naivety or if he thinks that is going to get Putin to scale back. But either way, I don't see any French candidate right now who is going to be tough on Putin. That's concerning. Um, so, obviously it's for the French people to decide. Um, those who say that Marine Le Pen's a fascist and, her rhetoric is dangerous and so on, there may be some truth in that. I certainly would think very, very carefully before voting for the likes of the Front National, given its history and, the fact that she has moderated it doesn't change its history. But having said that, the context is very important. France is a country that has suffered attack after attack from Islamic fundamentalists. This is a country where a young woman had to live in hiding because the Islamists were threatening her life, where a teacher was beheaded. Um, so, when people say, oh, why is France thinking about headscarf bans and so on, look at the context. France, perhaps more than any other Western country, has suffered from Islamic extremism. It's not the country that suffered most from Islamic extremism, that is ironically within Islamic countries. But France, among Western countries, has probably had more Islamist attacks than anywhere. Um, Most Western countries have had something. In Britain, we've certainly had our share, but France really does know about Islamic fundamentalism. So that context needs to be understood if people are wondering why France is taking a hard line against us. And even Macron is a lot more outspoken on the issue than most British politicians, which I give him credit for. Um, Macron, to be fair, he was forcefully defensive of French liberalism and French values when that young woman was threatened. Boris Johnson and Keir Starmer were silent when a teacher was threatened in the UK. I think in Britain we should learn from France. I think we should be more outspoken against Islamic fundamentalism. Um, anyway, the next round, of course, is in less than a fortnight. I think if Marine Le Pen wins, it would be huge. It would be a major, major story. I think she probably won't. I think it'll be very close, but I think that Macron will win. But nevertheless, he shouldn't be complacent. That should be a wake up call if it is very close. I think it's been a comparatively dull election compared to the last time. I don't think there's anything about it particularly stands out. For a while there was a bit of focus on that guy, Seymour, but he hasn't done very well. Jean-Luc Mélenchon has, he's a perennial candidate. He's quite strong. He's been called France's Jeremy Corbyn, but I don't think he has enough support to really make much of an impact. So it really is about Macron and Le Pen. Probably there'll be another video to make about that at the time. Personally, like I could say, I would think very carefully about voting for the Front National, and I don't trust Marine Le Pen when it comes to Putin. But I can understand that many French people do vote for her because they're fed up of what's happening in their country in terms of Islamic fundamentalism. Is she the answer though? I don't know. And that's the roundup.